how to be your own mentor? I'm going to answer this question in two parts. First part, I'm going to share with you a specific idea of what a genuine mentor should be. Second part, we are going to extract the main principle from this idea of what a genuine mentor should be, because if we know the main guiding principle of all real mentors, then we can use that guiding principle in our relationship with ourselves. So let's go straight into it. First part, the idea of a genuine mentor that I want to share with you comes from the existential humanistic psychology tradition. To be more precise, it comes from the following thinkers: Otto Rank, Carl Rogers, Rollo May, and Abraham Maslow. Now, what's important to point out is this. Carl Rogers, Rollo May, and Abraham Maslow are the founding figures of the existential humanistic movement in psychology, also called the third force in psychology. I will explain a bit more about them, but what about Otto Rank? Well, Otto Rank was the man who set the foundations for what would later become existential humanistic movement or humanistic psychology and existential psychotherapy. Otto Rank was the prodigy from the Freud's Vienna School of Psychoanalysis, alongside Carl Jung and Alfred Adler. He was actually Sigmund Freud's adopted son, pretty much, and he was intended to be Freud's inheritor, to inherit the title of the main figure in Freud's school of psychoanalysis. However, he rebelled against Freud, had his own ideas because he saw deep flaws in Freudian psychoanalysis, and part of this conversation will be that he set the foundations for a more encouraging, more human, and less focused on pathology view of human psychological development. If this doesn't sound very clear, don't worry, we will make it very simple and as clear as possible. So we have Otto Rank, the proto-humanistic psychologist, or the proto-existential psychologist. Proto meaning he predates them, he once again set the foundations for that. So Otto Rank was a major source of influence for Carl Rogers, Rollo May, and Abraham Maslow. Then they founded existential humanistic movement, which was that third force of psychology and was meant as a rebellion against Freudian psychoanalysis and cognitive behavioral therapy, both of which aimed to fix the human in different ways and having their own differences, Freudian psychoanalysis and cognitive behavioral therapy, or cognitive movement in general, but they had something in common. They sought primarily to fix the human. Existential humanists had a more holistic, more, no pun intended, human approach, and a more philosophical approach. That made them sometimes judged as anti-scientific because they had such a strong emphasis on philosophical approach. They also acknowledged spirituality. A lot of thinkers from the existential humanistic movement sort of predicted the Western interest in mindfulness and in Eastern practices. And a lot of them were involved directly with some of the Eastern teachers, or they were involved directly with some of the figures that will later become the prominent Western figures of Eastern Zen Buddhist teachings. So spirituality, philosophy, it ends up being are not so well accepted in mainstream psychology. So even though Abraham Maslow and Carl Rogers are considered some of the most influential and most cited psychologists of the 20th century, Rollo May not so much, although I hold him as high as the other two, they still didn't have their project end up being a success, this rebellion, third force of psychology. Now, I gave you maybe a bit too much of theory, but important to know that we are basing our understanding of what a mentor is, we are basing that understanding on the teachings of some of the most important thinkers of the 20th century. Otto Rank, Carl Rogers, Abraham Maslow, and Rollo May. So Otto Rank, even though he didn't become as popular as Carl Jung and Alfred Adler, and that's out of multiple different reasons. For example, he didn't create his own school. Once he departed from Freud and rebelled against Freud, he didn't create his own school like Jung did and like Alfred Adler did. Also, he's notoriously difficult to read, so he wasn't as marketable as the other two. However, even though he often goes unacknowledged, he set the foundations for what ends up being the most constructive and healthy and useful in therapy later on. Well, these thinkers all had something in common. Rank, Rogers, May, and Maslow believed that the goal of therapy is not to fix the human, is not for the therapist, or they would later say neither the teacher, nor the mentor, nor the counselor, is not to act from a position of authority and to expect the client, the patient, the mentee to submit to authority. They had a completely different vision. The goal of therapy, they considered, is to help clear the way for the human to become who they are, is to help working through or removing internal obstacles towards becoming who one is. So we right away see that there is a belief that one has an essence. You're not a blank piece of paper to be infinitely reshaped and molded by your external circumstances and environment. You have an essence. And they believed the whole goal, not of therapy, but of personal growth, is to become who you are. It's no coincidence that all of them were inspired by Nietzsche. And one of Nietzsche's most famous lines is, we want to become who we are. Become who you are. Create yourself. Well, from there we go a step further and say, not only that they said the goal is to clear the way for the therapist, clear the way and help the person become who they are without too much of an influence and no decision making on the therapist's part, they went a step further, and apart from Rank, who was not yet part of that conversation, he didn't have a chance like Rogers, May, and Maslow did. Rogers, May, and Maslow outright criticized the notion of a therapist, and Maslow went the furthest there. In Farther Reaches of Human Nature, Maslow criticizes the notion of a therapist or a patient. He criticizes the notion of such a thing as having a patient that needs to be cured. Imagine that. One of the most influential, important, greatest psychologists of the 20th century saying we have to move on to the next stage. It's been enough of fixing people, curing people. It's doing us no good anymore. Maslow was also inspired by Alfred Adler. Now we are bringing him into the conversation. As we said, part of the Freud school was Carl Jung, Alfred Adler, and Otto Rank, the greatest names. Alfred Adler and Jung being by far the most famous thinkers that came out of Freud school. Well, Adler has something similar or something in common with these thinkers. He was also one of the major influences for the humanistic movement, and he had this idea that the therapist should be a fellow traveler. And Maslow took that and ran with it. Maslow proposed this idea that the relationship between the therapist and the patient shouldn't be, once again, of the therapist and the patient, but more like a mentor or a guide that is walking beside and is being changed along with the other person. I will stop using the word patient. So now we have added Adler. So we have pretty much Avengers of psychology claiming that there is no such thing as fixing you and curing you, because you're not a car that is broken, you're not a machine that isn't working well. You're a human being that somewhere along the way has developed certain mechanisms, most probably for protection from certain experiences, and these mechanisms are not allowing you to express your full authenticity and are not allowing you to move towards actualizing the person that you're supposed to be or become. And as I said, some of them, like Maslow, are outright criticizing the idea of therapy. And all of them were involved in what will later become the industry of counseling, coaching, life mentorship. We have already announcements of that, predictions of that in Rollo May's book, The Art of Counseling, where he's basically outlining the coaching industry, or we should say the healthy side or the healthy potential of the coaching industry. I know now it gets, rightfully so, a bad reputation because a lot of people who are not genuinely inside of that industry to help people, but maybe to make a quick buck or two. But in any case, all of these thinkers saw a new path towards human relationships that facilitate growth of one of the people involved, or let's say the mission is to facilitate growth of one of the people involved. However, both of them grow in the process because the mentor cannot not be changed. Now, all of this is context that I'm hoping is interesting to some extent. So the main idea is that you cannot or should not be fixed, and that the goal of therapy and personal growth and personal development is to become who you are. So the process is clearing out the way towards your true self, towards who you should be, not fixing, not altering your personality. Well, what is one guiding principle that we can extract from this and you start implementing it in your relationship with yourself? Well, here it is. In all situations of doubt, uncertainty, overwhelm, anxiety, insecurity, lack of confidence, inner conflict, inner tension, you are approaching it with a question, not how do I need to change, what type of person I need to become. And I know those are popular questions and they can make sense in some context, but for now, let's move them aside. We are always asking the question, how can I move towards who I already am? We are making an assumption. We are proceeding forward with a belief that all that is best in us, or to correct myself, all the best that we can be is already in us. It needs to be uncovered and we need to clear out the way for it to be expressed. So you have to recognize there is a great difference here between finding yourself in a situation of an inner conflict and thinking that you need to become a different person, that you need to change profoundly, that you need to fix yourself, that you need to remove this part of yourself or add on this part of yourself, this new part. There is a great difference between that and the idea that all of the best things that I could possibly be are already in me. And this is not some woo-woo, new age affirmations in the mirror type of stuff. Like just say it and it will happen. No. This is acknowledgement of the idea. I will never say a fact because now we are in a philosophical realm. Acknowledgement of the idea that you do have an essence and that essence is constantly trying to be expressed, but we have certain barriers that are preventing it from being expressed. And therefore, in every situation that you find yourself in, a problematic situation of inner uncertainty and discomfort and conflict and tension, you're approaching it with an attitude that this is a challenge of clearing out the way for the self to be expressed. This is a challenge of making a small step, another step towards authenticity, rather than becoming fully authentic overnight. Making another step towards being more of who you are. Maslow said, self-actualization is the urge to become more and more of who we are. Not to wake up one day and go Super Saiyan and reach the peak. Even in Dragon Ball, there's Super Saiyan 2 and whatever. I don't know how many levels they reached. I never watched the full series, but even Super Saiyan is not the highest level. So even they're confirming that self-actualization is a never-ending journey. So the pressure isn't on you to figure out how to be your best self tomorrow. The challenge or the question is to ask yourself in all of these situations, and no matter how abstract it might seem to you right now, I'm asking you to pause with yourself 30 seconds. Move away everything, all distractions, and in that situation or that period of uncertainty, tension, conflict, you sit with yourself for 30 seconds, 60 seconds. Maybe later down the line you spend more time with yourself, but let's start with 30 seconds, 60 seconds, and you ask yourself, okay, I cannot be fixed, I should not be fixed, I don't need to be fixed. I don't really need to change. I need to transform something inside, the order and the structure of how I'm operating. But I don't need to change also. My personality doesn't need to change. So no fixing, no changing, okay? All of the best things that I could be are already inside. Of unique qualities, not qualities that you've seen in someone else and you think it would be cool that you are like that person. No. All of the best things that you uniquely could possibly be are inside. Okay. Then how could I act? What decision could I make? What type of change in attitude could I make? What courageous step? And when I say courageous, maybe that's the shift in attitude. Maybe attitude of courage. Maybe attitude of commitment. Maybe attitude of honesty. Maybe attitude of openness. So which one of these decisions, changes in attitude, concrete steps can I take not to fix myself, not to change myself, but to go at least one step closer to becoming who I already am, and who I already am is waiting to be uncovered? Or if I'm not taking a step toward becoming who I already am, can I at least clear some way so that at least the path toward down the line becoming who I am is a bit more clear, or a bit more walkable? I know it might seem abstract. That's why it's not as easy to standardize. It's not as easy to make repeatable and systematic like some other schools of psychology. But this is how you can be your own mentor. We could go as far as to say this is how you can start being your own therapist. Again, none of this is, I have to emphasize, none of this is medical advice or trying to discourage you from either seeking a therapist or seeking mentors in real life. On the contrary, seek help, seek guidance, seek mentorship, seek advice always. But you also want to learn to rely on yourself when needed. And this is the first, and I would argue, the most important and most constructive shift that you can make right now. From focus on fixing and changing to focus on clearing out the way for the self to emerge, for the self to be uncovered. Another thing that you can ask is, what decision, step, or change in attitude, so I'm using the word change, but specifically for attitude, can I make to find out a bit more of who I am and what I'm supposed to let emerge? If we are uncovering the self, Maslow talked about it a lot. Rogers talked about it a lot. If we are uncovering the self, then let's take a step toward uncovering it a bit more. If we cannot take concrete steps towards becoming who we are, take steps towards understanding ourselves better. So you can imagine how much pressure it's taken off, or how much pressure there's been removed, where you're not seeking this violent change of yourself, you're not seeking this violent removal of parts of yourself, but you're seeking to uncover what is already inside, to find out a bit more of who you truly are, to walk towards that, to clear the path towards that, while acknowledging that all the best that you could be is already there. I'm hoping this makes you feel empowered in a genuine way, not in a temporary motivational way, in a genuine way, where you start carrying this with yourself, this deep belief that there is an essence in you, essence that is truly uniquely yours. I'm leaving you with these questions. Let me know in the comments if you want to learn more about existential humanistic tradition, if you want to learn more about the ideas of existential humanists who had a completely different vision or significantly different vision from a lot of what is being presented to us as mainstream psychology. Again, all the respect to a lot of great psychologists from cognitive behavioral tradition, from Freudian psychoanalysis, and other adjacent schools of psychology, but I'm making an argument that existential humanistic psychology deserves way more of our attention and maybe has the most important insight and wisdom for this moment in time that we are living in, with the rise of AI, where all of us will be questioning more and more what it means to be human. No school of psychology addressed that question like existential humanistic did. Other schools of psychology pretty much don't even deal with such questions. So once again, if you want to learn more, please let me know in the comments and I will gladly make more videos about this tradition and specific thinkers from it. As always, stay strong, love life, never feel sorry for yourself, light that raging fire in your heart, and always go beyond. Thank you.